All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the December Savvy series with AFWA. And I'm excited to do our last presentation for the year on increasing motivation. And the reason I kind of wanted to go through this topic is because the new year is a really great time to set new goals, but the challenge is really staying motivated. And I think if we can talk about staying motivated now, we can work some of those kind of good ways to stay motivated into our plans. And so what I'm doing here today is I'm sharing what I do each year as I go into the new year. For the most part, most of these tips are coming straight out of what I have done and what's worked for me over the years. So they aren't from a textbook. They aren't theories. They aren't, for the most part, what a researcher says you should do. They're just simply things that have worked for me. And so as we go along, please put any questions in. I'm happy to answer those as we go along, especially if we're still on that slide and talking about that topic. I always like those kind of questions as we move through all of the topics. And then I'll also post 3 questions. So those of you who are regulars, you know this routine. I'll post 3 questions during the webinar to get your response so that I know you're engaged. And of course, that's a requirement for us to be able to offer you CPE credit. And if you're here just for your own personal development, you don't need CPE credit. That's awesome. Don't feel like you have to put in answers to those questions. But if you do, I like getting that feedback. But also, we use that to provide the CPE credit. So if you do answer all of those questions, you will get a CPE certificate. And so when we have those, please type those into the questions box. We're still trying to figure out why you all don't see a chat box, but I do. And we'll track attendance that way and get you all your CPE certificates within 2 weeks, which really will be before the end of the year. And so what I wanted to cover today was not only what has been kind of successful for you this year and what was achieved by you, but also kind of what might have stolen your motivation for the year. So we might look at how you can keep that motivation for next year, setting some foundations and looking at areas of focus, and of course, how you keep those things in mind and stay motivated. So when it comes to these 6 key ways that I have come up with, I culled through my personal planner, and those of you who have met me in person or have been around me for a while, you know I have this nice little binder that I always carry with me. So my personal planner, you'll actually see pages out of it, my own journals, notes, and files to share kind of my best insights. And this is what I came up with. So the 6 ways to keep yourself motivated, I'll go through each of these. So identifying what has worked well and what hasn't, setting up a foundation or creating a foundation, having a plan, master plan, and some master tasks, words, positivity, and gratitude, celebrating and rewarding yourself, and then also self-care. And I'll go through each of these and share some how-tos to get you started and kind of things to be thinking about and how to implement them. So that first one of what's worked well and what has not. If you go back through all of 2017, ask yourself these questions. So maybe you grab yourself a big cup of coffee and some quiet space in your house or your office or even the local coffee shop and ask yourself these questions and write out some truthful answers for yourself. And this, I recommend doing this because it's been recommended to me before and it works for me, just to go back and do a little bit of reflection so that I know how to set myself up for success in the new year. So what was so great about 2017? Was it something with your career? And of course, this is going to be more than one thing. What was great in terms of your friends, family, your work, your career, so not just the job that you're in, but kind of the trajectory you're on or planning for the future, what worked out really well. And then also what changed you or challenged you this past year. Were those good things that changed, or were they things that were a little bit of a challenge? And what did you learn about yourself? When it comes to those things of what you learned, one of my kind of daily I don't always do this day to day, but I at least think about it of what lessons did I learn today? Did I write out too much on my to-do list that was a little bit too ambitious, which happens often, and can be a motivation killer? Or did you realize that, how you manage your time was something that you changed and worked really well for you? Then also thinking about, and we'll talk about gratefulness and gratitude in part of the next topics, but what were you grateful for this year? Was it a change in responsibilities? Was it a move? Was it some new connection or expansion in your network? And then also, what are you letting go of? So when it comes to this whole past year, these past 12 months, what did you let go of or release? So if it was a volunteer commitment that you just couldn't keep up with, that you didn't have time to manage, was it your own, say, guilt and not achieving or doing something? Some of those things can be self-defeating. So are those things that you let go of? Did you let go of expectations or things that just weren't going to be feasible, or something that just was toxic? So think about those questions in a little bit of a quiet space so that you can set yourself up for a positive 2018. And some of those questions can be broken down into a little bit of further sub-questions. So when you look at successes, and that's what keeps me motivated, I keep an ongoing list. Here's another secret tidbit into the Erica Insights, is I keep a running list of everything that I consider a success. And I'm not just talking the past year, I'm talking like since 1991. I've literally kept a list of everything that was an accomplishment or a success. And whenever I have those like moments of self-doubt or think that I'm not achieving something, I go back and look at that list. So when you are thinking of staying motivated, identify what those successes were this year, or maybe even going back into past years, and what made those successes? How did you accomplish that? Was it just the way you went about planning? Was it who was involved in helping you accomplish these things? What did you learn? Were there new skill sets? And then how can what you learn and how you went about achieving it be applied to, say, future goals? Is there anything that's transferable? And then also, not only did you celebrate, but how did you celebrate that success? Did you just take a time out for yourself and go to the spa? Or did you literally just have a nice quiet cup of coffee, no kids, no pets, no significant other, no work, no phone, just to have some quiet time? Even that can be a way to celebrate, and we'll talk about some of those too. So think about at least your top 3 successes from this year and dig into them a little bit more. Take some time in the next couple of weeks and think about those so that you can keep those in mind. Maybe keep them in the front of your calendar for next year so that you're just reminded of those as a way to keep yourself motivated. And then also think about those challenges that we talked about, the things that were bad. What were the trials and tribulations, and why were they challenges? What made them kind of opportunities for growth for you? How did you overcome them? Or there are some things that stress-wise just were not going to be positive outcomes for you, but what did you learn from them and how you coped with those? Did you tap into other talents of other people or yourself, or find new strategies for yourself? So I mentioned those not because we want to talk about the negative, but more so what were the ways you went about handling them so that if you come up against a challenge in 2018, you're able to stay motivated because of what you've learned from this year. So I bring that up only so that we can take the benefits of it and stay motivated for what we're looking to accomplish. So that's the first one in terms of looking at what you can take from this year to stay motivated next year. And you can even do that month to month if you wanted to. Do a little month in reflection and asking the same questions of what was great for, say, December. What was the one success this month or two? And maybe you do that on a month to month basis in addition to on an annual basis, so that you can keep yourself motivated on a more continuous basis as opposed to looking at this, say, every December. So think about that as you move forward with some of these things into the new year. So then the second one that I have is creating a foundation. And the reason why I list this as pretty much right there up next to number one is that it's important. At least this is how I've kind of set myself up each year so that I can stay motivated. So I have it in front of me, and I'll explain what that foundation consists of. So what I do every year, and they really don't change that much from year to year, and I'll show you examples of these, but I at least look at them every year to make sure that these are still things that I value. So I create a list of values and value statements, and I'll give you my examples that are literally mine from what I list out each year. And then also from those priorities and priority-based goals. They're pretty overarching, if you will, and you'll see what I'm talking about, just so that I have something to focus on. So when I get bogged down or I get overwhelmed, okay, these are the things in front of me that I know are my priorities, first and foremost. And then from those, you'll list out things that you're passionate about. You'll identify some of those. And then last but not least, I mentioned perpetual lists. And the reason I do that is if I don't have to take time to remember small stuff, so everything that I should do, say on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, simple tasks at work and at home, if I don't have to remember them, like I have it down in a checklist and then I have like a reminder in my calendar to do it, then I have more brain capacity to focus on bigger things. So I might just have that checklist of every week of, I need to make sure I take the recycling out and the trash out. I know in the back of my head I have to do it every Thursday, but if I don't have to remember it on purpose, like it's written down somewhere that has to happen every Thursday, then I don't have to think about it, and I can use that brain capacity somewhere else. So you'll kind of see what I'm getting at with this whole foundation piece. So I mentioned values and value statements, and so I look at these, and I'm going to look at them again this month to see if there are things that I want to add to this, or if there's been anything that's changed. So I didn't want to make it too long of a list, and I wanted to make it pretty broad of the things that I value. And those four things being skill, altruism, achievement or outcomes from work, and then relationships. So family and friends, making sure that I feel like I have contributed. That's what that whole value of achievement, and maybe it should be contributions, but or outcomes or work, and maybe I'll change the wording around that. Giving back to others, and then also making sure that I stay on top of my game with those skills. Those are the four big things as I go through the year that I know I value the most out of what I'm doing. And so every goal or priority goes back to one of those four values and making sure that I stay on top of keeping those strong, if you will. And the reason I mention this in terms of staying motivated and keeping that motivation going is because when those are front and center, then decisions are easier. And at least in my perspective, this is just my opinion, but those decisions that you have to make of, do I do this or do I not? Do I say yes? Do I say no? Which is the full sentence. If it doesn't relate to these four things, then should I do it? And so that's where I start this whole process, because it keeps me motivated when I know I have these four things that I'm committed to. So I set those value statements, and then I also set out priorities. And what's really interesting is I've been doing this whole list of priorities each year for probably the past 8, 9 years now, and it took a good 5 years for myself to be number one on that list, which now is kind of a dumb moment. Like, of course, my first priority should be myself, because if I don't make myself a priority, then I'm not going to be any good to anybody else. So what's the point? Now, do I always stick to that? No. So there are some times where you put other people ahead of yourself, but so it did take a while for myself to rise to those priorities. But what are your other priorities? So this can be personal, work, you name it, any kind of realm of your life. And so I look at these again every year as well. So I mentioned myself and friends and family, my pets, my professional development, my career, so AFWA, altruism, that goes back to the helping others, and my home and what I work for. And so based on those, all of those priorities go back to what I value. And again, those were being these 4 things. All of these go back to those 4 values, and then I create somewhat of a goal around each one. These are not SMART goals, so they probably shouldn't be called goals, but they're based on each priority. So just as a good example of, say, just the priority of helping others, serve others as much as possible as a volunteer, leader, and donor. So then within that, I have things that, let's say in my budget, I know I've put aside this amount of money to donate to causes that I'm passionate about. Same thing with volunteering and being on boards and serving. So just as one example of all of those. So first I started with the values, then I did my priorities. And I look at the goals for those. And I will tell you, first and foremost, all of these are going to change in the next year. And they probably will too for you as you do this each year, and looking at them and reevaluating things that are priority that go back to your values. So this is what I do every year. And I keep these front and center. Literally, it's like the first few pages of my calendar, my binder, my planner, so that I'm reminded of them. And it just makes the day-to-day easier, and it keeps my motivation going, because this is what I'm working on. This is how I go about my day-to-day. And so I share that just as one tip of motivation that has worked for me. And so I do want to get to our first CPE question, which goes to your accomplishments and keeping you motivated. So with our first CPE question, what is or was your greatest accomplishment in 2017 that you can answer all those questions about, that you'll keep in mind for motivation in 2018? So what was it that you achieved this year that you're going to keep in mind, front and center? Maybe you write down those things of how you achieved it, what you learned from it, that are going to keep you motivated for next year. So I'll give you a little bit of time to answer that. Your greatest accomplishment that's going to keep you motivated next year. So some great responses. Got my home office organized and drawers cleaned. I think that feeling of purging is sometimes one of the best feelings you can ever get. Built a new house, built trust with the management processes that worked, ran 2 half marathons. More power to you on that one. I don't think I would ever be able to do that in a lifetime. And just a quick reminder that for these CPE questions, please put your answer in the questions box, and I'll keep track of those. Actually started doing exercise, delegating, new position. I love it. A lot of no's. All right. So your greatest accomplishment. And don't forget, when you're looking at this greatest accomplishment for the year, go back and look at those questions around what made it a great what made it a great accomplishment, and how can you use that for next year? All right. So I think we've got most of our answers, a lot of promotions, which is awesome. So what led to that promotion? And what can you do in the next year to make sure that you're that motivated? Let's see. All right. So let's go on to the third tip that I have for you, which is creating master plans and tasks for the year. Now, you'll see what I'm talking about as I go through some of these, because I'll share what I've done this year. But when I say a master plan and tasks, that's not necessarily saying that you have to have all of next year completely outlined. That's not it by any stretch. But there are some things that you know that you need to accomplish at some point in the year. So what I do is I go by kind of each area of focus, and I'll give you my list of all those areas in a second. And what I do is I list out the activities and tasks that I know I want to achieve next year at some point in a certain area of focus. And again, I'll show you my list. And what is it and some of them I'll put like timelines around, like I know this has to be done in March. I know this has to be done in May. And so that's what I do for each one. And I keep that master task list front and center next to those values and priorities. So as I go along and I'm making plans for each month, each week, each quarter, where am I working these things in? And there are some that will have some SMART goals to them, specifically like when they are, being specific as to what they are, quantifying them as much as possible, and sometimes even outline what I need to do to accomplish that goal. So what I do for mine, these are all, again, based off of values and priorities. So my areas of focus, and these are going to change, so I update these every year, whether it's I take something off or I include a new one. But these are my areas of focus. So I have work, PhD, professional development, house and the car, financial health, creative. These are all things that, based on my values and my priorities, are important to me. So you may have not just family within yours, but family, and then the kids may be something separate. Or you may have your house and your car underneath financial. However you want to set that up. So this just kind of gives you an example of what I do. And then under each area of focus, what I do is I create a master task list. Now, I mentioned that these are things that I spread out through the year. It's not an immediate to-do list like right in January. It's things I know I want to achieve that year. So this past year, just as an example with health, I had walking with my mom. Notice I didn't put on a regular basis on there, like once a week or a certain time of the year or anything like that. Just go visit my mom and go take her for a walk. Use a stair stepper at least once a week. That was really a stretch. I always, sometimes you put on there losing weight or being more healthy, no more than 3 meals a week out. Just something to stick to. Now, of course, that didn't happen like every week, but at least it was kind of a good guideline. So I did this for each of those areas. So if I go back to these areas of focus, I did those for each. And say under professional development, I had just maintaining 2 of my credentials that renewed this year, contributing to a blog post, presenting at the Grant Professionals Association conference. Those were all under, say, professional development. And those were all things that I knew I wanted to do. And say, like for presenting at GPA, I know that all of those requests for presenters are due in March. So I can at least put in my master task list, make sure to have that in by March. And then I go into my calendar and I make sure that I've scheduled in March to do that. So that's how I start to kind of plan out the year, is I do those master tasks uh, and lay those out, and then um, get pretty specific. Now, what I also do is I go back and see and kind of write down results and notes and things as to how I did for those. So, I put the date I might have achieved something, so I check it off. Like the others and extras that I have at the bottom of that list, like this year was knocking, I think it was like 4 more states off of my list. So my goal is 50 by 40. And so I knocked 3 states off of that list this year. So that's just under the extras, the others, just something, fun that I wanted to do. So think about doing that. It's not necessarily something that you have to do, but I like setting up those master tasks because it keeps me motivated in each area of my life, and so that I don't forget it. That's essentially the reason why I write all this down. For those of you who are Indiana Jones fans, if you remember Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and the father, he's like, well, I wrote it all down so I didn't have to remember. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm writing it all down so I don't have to remember. So the key thing too is to figure out what works for you when you are looking at all these master tasks and planning and so on. And I mention this just because I'm a kind of combo person between electronic and paper. You know, think about how you want to keep yourself organized when you do all of these things. And then I think that also keeps you motivated. So not picking a new system for yourself every year, because I think that's a demotivator. It might be a motivator for you, but to me, it's actually a demotivator because it's frustrating for me to learn a new system. So I stick with what works for me. Then I also look at timing, and I mentioned I try to put as time specific of things as I can around each of those master tasks, or what I can do at least, and work that into my schedule. So, reminding yourself to go back and visit your goals. I go back and look and visit my priorities and my values every year around this time. So working that timing into all of what you're doing to track and to do your scheduling, your activities, and so on. And the last two, I have pick a word, which I'm actually going to go into the whole words and positivity and so on. So I'll explain a little bit more of that. And then also visualize. I'm a huge visualization person. I know some people might roll their eyes at the thought of, say, a vision board. But I don't think vision boards, one, have to be complicated or cheesy, or massive and take up your whole wall. So I just have a picture there of a small one. It's actually the size of an index card that I keep just as a reminder of my goal to visit all 50 states by the time I'm 40. And so that literally was just kind of my visual reminder of all the different places that I want to go. And so it doesn't have to be anything that you share often, which this is giving you insight into me. I'm sharing a lot of different visualization things here today. And so use what works for you, but I personally like to have the visual reminder of different goals and different tasks that I'm looking forward to doing. So I mentioned words and visualization, positivity, and gratitude. And I think that may be the one motivator for me that I wouldn't make it priority one, but I say it's the most influential for me personally. And I'll show you what I mean. So every year, I pick a word of the year. I've done this this will be going on like 5 years now. So this year, my word was spark. I wasn't sure why when I picked that word about this time last year. It just sounded kind of inspirational and action-oriented and fun. And boy, did that word have more meaning in my life this year than I thought it would. But so what I like to do is I go about picking a word. This year was spark. Last year was focus. 2015 was thrive. So I keep track of them too. But think about what's going to happen in 2018 for certain. You know that in this year, you're going to graduate. You're going to achieve your CPA. whatever that might be. Write those things out. What are you hoping will happen in the next year? What dreams do you have, or what dreams are you hoping to bring to fruition? So write some of these things out, like the areas of your life that need to be supported, or what does your soul need in the upcoming year? Does it need patience? Does it need, do you need to think about things in a more insightful manner? Do you need to be reaching out? What do those things look like? Write all those things down, and what I do is I start underlining like keywords in all of those things, and that's how I pick my word. Sometimes that comes out of, you know, what my goals might be. And last year I just I forget where exactly. I'm sure if I went back through my notes, I could tell you where it came from. It just did. And so then I created this whole kind of visualization around that word. You don't have to do that. I just personally, this is what I created and have in my binder. Like that card right there is actually from an AFWA member that sent me a couple of years ago, and just a couple of nice reminders and positive things to remember as I go through the year. And so that's what I do. I personally find that it's helpful and it keeps me motivated. So there's a whole picking of a word, and I'm in that process right now for my word for next year. But I also look at things that are positive and gratitude. So think about, especially in these times anymore, I feel like everything, doesn't matter if it's politics, if it's kids, if it's animals, whatever, there's so much negative information and negative stories that, you know, with news, if it bleeds, it leads kind of deal. And it just gets overwhelming, and it's demotivating. And so sometimes you just have to turn it off. So say, read and listen to more positive information. And if you fill your mind with more uplifting and inspiring information, it keeps you motivated. So find maybe a podcast that you like to listen to, even if it's not necessarily something that's geared towards like a positive message. It's something that's interesting and it isn't negative. One podcast that I've gotten really kind of addicted to this year is called Sawbones, and it's a podcast about medical history. It has nothing really to do with like staying positive, but it's informational and informative. And so I'm learning something, but it's also really funny. And so that's my one thing that I listen to that kind of isn't a negative message. Let me put it that way. So put out there your constant reminders for yourself. Positive people too. And I know I can be a negative person sometimes, but some people who are chronically negative can really affect you and your focus, may take you off your goals. And I don't even want to say like necessarily negative people, but more toxic people, because I think we can all have those down days where we don't always say the most positive things. But people that are chronically toxic, think about how you reroute around some of those folks, and making sure that they aren't negatively influencing your life and your motivation. And then, so this is also personal preference, the whole positive affirmations. I personally like seeing them. I don't necessarily recite them, but I at least see them. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't do me any good, and then other days it puts a smile on my face. So if it works for you, do it. I mean, if you want to stick it on your bathroom mirror, you stick it on your refrigerator, on your calendar, what have you. I think it keeps you motivated. It reminds you of something that you're working towards. Then also with gratitude, what I like to do in my planner every day is write down in the morning what I'm thankful for. This morning I'm thankful for, and one or two things. And then at night, you know, tonight I am thankful for one or two things. I will tell you, the past 2 days when I've woken up, I am thankful for cold medicine. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose. It just is a regular reminder of the things that you are grateful for on a day-to-day basis. I will mention, like, one researcher, Dr. Murray, Michael Murray, notices that through research that shows that adults who are more grateful have higher levels of well-being, are happier, are less depressed, less stressed, and more satisfied with their lives and social relationships. So while the whole idea of me being thankful that there's cold medicine in this world may not necessarily for the day be the biggest thing, but I've been at least noticing at least what I'm grateful for, as small as something might be, you know? So what I do is I write out every morning and every evening, you know, just like every other habit. It doesn't always happen, but I try to at least make the time for it. You can also think about a gratitude journal, something that you keep track of the things that you are grateful for. I just happen to have a planner and I write it in that. When I said, you know, being or having visual representations of things, sharing with you all these two things. So like the one on the left, this is literally the cover of my planner. And so just things that as I saw them, I just started to keep them front and center. And then on the inside of my planner, like the first page is just all about like each day. Today is going to be a good day. Today is going to be awesome. So just as a reminder that day to day will make the whole, makes your year. And so it keeps me motivated, just as a reminder. To some people that may not be necessarily a thing that works for you, but find what works for you. So I've mentioned, you know, words, positivity, gratitude, master task lists, all of that kind of stuff. And I come to our second CPE question. If you had to pick your word for 2018 right now, what would it be? You don't have to stick to it, but think about it. What would it be? So some great words coming in: kindness, joy, creative, present. I love that one. Decluttering. And if the creativity bone isn't striking you right at this moment, if you can't think of something, put that in the response box so that I know that you're engaged.
All right, and hopefully you all can still hear me. If you don't mind putting in the questions box if you can hear me, or raise a hand. I accidentally hung up on myself, so I'm using my computer audio. I told Debbie I would do it. I was like, I'm going to hit that button. I just know I'm going to do it. So thank goodness you all can still hear me. Thank you very much. So some great words that you all have come up with, and maybe some of those will stick for you. Hang on to those words and see if it sticks to the wall, as we like to say here, if it sticks for you. All right, so the fifth one of keeping yourself motivated is celebrating and rewarding yourself. So it doesn't have to be anything big, but what do I mean by celebrating or rewarding yourself? So a couple things. If you do have like specific goals in mind that you're going to do this year, plan some specific rewards for that. If you are renewing a credential, or you are earning one, have a specific reward for that. Promotions, or say a pay increase, have a specific reward for those. it doesn't have to be something that costs you money. It doesn't always, for me, it doesn't always have to involve food. I'm always like, oh yeah, I'll go buy a new box of chocolates. It doesn't have to do that either. But if it does involve money, it's something, if you do plan for those specific rewards, you can budget for them. I'm sure I don't have to tell this group that, but it's something that you can work into your budget. And when it comes to rewards, I've had to start thinking of what those new versions of a reward is. If I've been in my office, really banging out a project, and that really is my reward, is to actually get up and walk around and go outside. The thought of that being a reward to me was ridiculous a few years ago. But now that is, like, I have to mentally train myself to think, yes, that is a reward, in the sense that I'm taking time for myself. So that's kind of how you have to look at rewards at this point. And then something that you might also consider is sharing some of your goals with family and friends so that they can celebrate with you, especially those bigger ones. But, for others, you might want to get, say, a fresh cup of coffee, or treat yourself to dessert, or for those bigger things, doing something enjoyable, like if you have a hobby that you really enjoy but haven't gotten to spend time on. If you quilt, if you crochet, if you knit, something like that, taking, an hour and not say forcing yourself, but actually taking the time out and saying, you know what, I earned this time to do what I enjoy is fun. So finding that balance is exactly what those rewards are. So, going to a movie by yourself or with friends or family, taking a trip, buying yourself something. I'll at least, like, on my list, like, gifts to myself. This year I had, like, a new tote bag, which I probably needed, like, hole in the head, a piece of jewelry that I really wanted. So think of some of the small things and the big things that you might be able to use for some of those rewards. And then what I also wanted to do in terms of celebrating and share with you all is, in my own space, what I have done to celebrate myself. So at least in the space that I do not really share with anybody, it's mine, so I can do with whatever I want to with it. I put up those visual reminders to myself of successes or achievements, or sometimes just the things that have gone on in my life throughout time. And so here's what I've done. This is my office at home, and you can see on different walls, like in that bottom picture, are just several positive things that I surround myself with, but then also my certificates and degrees and things like that. As cheesy as it might sound, or self-serving, or I don't know, even selfish sometimes, I have a mantle of myself. Now, this is my space and nobody else sees it. This is not in the office. It's not at work, for people just to walk by and be like, you gotta be kidding me. This is just for me. So some of that stuff literally that you see there is like from high school and college. So some of it's old, some of it's new, but it's just a good reminder of, okay, well, I did that once, I could do something similar again. Or, I know that I'm capable. It's just a good reminder of things that you have done. I also, hang up on that top left picture, keep all the name badges of whenever I go to a meeting or conference, or when I present somewhere, just as a reminder of all the places that I've been and all the people that I've met, because that's the kind of stuff that keeps me motivated. So you have to remind yourself of the things that do keep you motivated. If your past successes are one of those, then throw it all up on the wall so that you see it every day. And then last but not least is self-care. We've done this as a webinar unto itself, but self-care will keep you motivated because it helps you take a little bit of time. And I kind of put this in a little bit of rewards, but honestly, I don't think you should consider taking time for your mental health or your physical health to be a reward. So self-care focuses on the physical, the mental, and emotional health of yourself. And of course, it's much more than work-life balance. So one model, this is just one that I've done in the self-care webinar that kind of shows how all of them are integrated, is the emotional, the physical or your body, your spirit, relationships, work, and mental. And all of these things are just kind of how they all integrate into themselves and influence yourself and how you interact day to day. So fostering relationships, making sure that you're listening to what your body is saying, reducing stress, paying attention when you are not feeling well, but also making an effort to keep relationships going. That's not just personal relationships, that's professional relationships, networking. So I think of self-care as part of staying motivated, because if I'm healthy, or feeling more healthy than normal, or I'm uplifted, if I'm staying in a positive frame of mind, all of that helps me stay motivated. So that's why I mentioned self-care, is because when you feel well, you're motivated. That's at least how I see it, is if when you feel well overall, in all these pieces of self-care, all pieces of your life, you're more likely to be motivated. And when you come up with a self-care plan, and for those of you who are AFWA members, you can access the recording for that self-care webinar through the members portal. If you do not have access to it, just email me, let me know, and I'll make sure you get at least the handouts for that. But in that webinar, I go through like a self-care plan. So know, when it comes to self-care, know like where you are with things. Know if something is positive for you or negative. Then identify stressors. These can be things, they can be people, they can be situations. Is it something that you have to deal with on a monthly basis that you know you don't enjoy, so you have to prepare yourself for that stress? And then also knowing, once you know like who or what or which thing is a stressor, know the solution for it. So I know if a particular person I know I have to work with, or I have to, they're part of a project team, or, volunteer if they're on a committee with me, I don't necessarily enjoy working with them, or they are a stressor to me just because of our way of doing work just doesn't mesh. That's okay, and we find a common bond, or how we're going to accomplish the goal regardless. But I also know that that's a stressor because I just don't want to be there with that person, but I have to be. So my solution to that is just knowing, okay, focusing on the end goal, but also knowing when the meeting is done. So if that meeting's over at 3 o'clock, I am done at 3. So that's one thing that, say, I might make really clear to the committee chair, if I'm not the committee chair, to say at 3 I'm out of here. So that's my solution, is to stay on time, not contribute to making a meeting go longer than it has to. And then also maybe part of that solution is spend some outside networking time with that person. Maybe I just don't know them that well. So maybe that's a more long-term solution to overcome that stressor if it's a particular person. If it's a thing or an activity, maybe the solution is a reward when you're done with it. If it's something that isn't going to occur often, maybe quarterly or something like that. But also know how you can react to things and what your solutions are, so that when they come up, you're ready for them. And when you're looking at all those, just kind of come through some of those stressors, identify stressors that might be, physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, relationships or people, workplace or professional, Other areas might be getting more specific into, say, family in those relationships versus your professional relationships or networking relationships. So identify those stressors in each and go back to this self-care plan of those solutions. And so coming to our last CPE question, and this goes back to self-care. So if we're looking at things that you can do, taking time out, making sure that you are taking time for yourself. Maybe that's journaling if that's something for you. Our last CPE question of some of the self-care things that you can do, what would you likely do in the coming year that would keep you motivated? So when it comes to self-care, what would be the most motivating thing for you? When you have to take time out, what would be motivating? Honestly, one of my biggest self-care moments is getting into the woods, like actually going hiking or, seeing countryside, something like that. It could be around sleep. So I'm seeing a lot of like going to bed earlier, getting the sleep that you need, exercising, taking time for yourself, meditation, leaving work on time is a good one. And if self-care isn't something that you've thought about, but maybe something that you think about, if you can't think about a specific one, write in that you're still thinking about it. Yoga, more power to those of you who can do yoga. I don't think I could. More exercising. For me, one of my self-care things too is I do my own manicures and pedicures. It makes me like actually stop and take time out and sit and chill out for 2 hours. So I do those for myself. Those are some of my self-care things. Journaling, awesome. So what is the one or two self-care methods that you're looking for to staying motivated next year? And if there isn't something that you can think of, put that in the questions box as well. And while you all are sharing those in the questions box, I'll put up our questions slide. So if you do have any questions about the content that we've shared today, please put that in the questions box. And while those questions are coming in, just as a reminder for all of those who are not currently AFWA members or are currently AFWA members and need some good reminders of things that you can do to stay involved with AFWA. Don't forget that we are online and regularly posting to our social networks. So please engage with us there. Share the things that we post. Maybe use them as a way to recruit folks for your chapter, to show that the kinds of content that we're sharing out there and promoting, and of course the promotion of our own members and chapters. Our national conference dates are going to be finalized this month, so look forward to those coming out. And of course, you all are participating on a webinar today, but stay tuned for some of the stuff that we've got coming on for 2018. So any questions that you have, please put those in the questions box. And so any questions about what we've covered today, I am happy to answer those. So we have a good question from Tricia. Should you share goals with others? So there are some that I do. I don't share all of mine. especially I think one that gets a little kind of hairy is when you have to take an exam for a credential. And, we should always stay positive and know that we're going to pass. But sometimes there are those times where we don't. And so sometimes I've shared the overall goal to earn a credential, but I haven't told them when the exam is. So sometimes I do share those goals, but others I kind of keep to myself. If there are goals that that somebody can either help you with or be helpful in terms of reminding you of those goals or being supportive, then I would share those with like particular individuals. Or maybe you do have like, say, a goal sharing with a particular friend, so you do check-ins with that person. Nothing that has to be competitive or anxiety driven, but something that might be positive. Another question, just in terms of national conference, might the national AFWA conference sessions be videotaped and offered for CPE via webinars? So that's something that we have thought about. Right now, it's not something that we have budgeted, but there may be a way in the future that we can do something. It's just going to depend. So it's definitely on our radar. Any other questions? I'm happy to answer. All right, so if you do have any questions, another good question for Maggie: has the planning become less time consuming? It seems somewhat overwhelming. So for me, it has gotten a little bit easier because I have a similar process that I use year in, year out. When it comes to the whole planning, I kind of take it in chunks. If I go back to all the different areas, you don't always have to set a goal for every single area of your life. So these are just the ones that I've gradually added over the years. And that's certainly a good question, Maggie, because then you can overwhelm yourself and really demotivate yourself. So I say take the ones that are priority and do those first, especially around if there are certain things that you want to achieve. But take maybe the top 3 first and see what you can come up with there first before getting into the rest of kind of areas of focus, so that it doesn't become overwhelming or time consuming. And for me, to make it less time consuming, I actually just plan some of that time each year. Typically, I take that time between Christmas and New Year's because typically the office is closed. So that's when I make more time to do it. And then some of it I consider, my professional development for myself. So it's not like I can get CPE for that, but I make sure I schedule the time. And so that'll keep some of the time consuming part of it to be less. But I say not only that, but finding the mechanisms that you want to use to keep track of your own time and how you track goals that works best for you will keep it from being time consuming. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated. You don't have to buy a new planner or say a new way of organizing just because it happens to be the latest and greatest according to like 10 Pinterest posts. Use what works for you. If that's an Excel spreadsheet, it's an Excel spreadsheet. If it's a piece of notebook paper, it's a piece of notebook paper. So that's how I keep it from being time consuming. And another good question, does sharing positive messages accomplish some of the goals also? I think so. When it comes to, like, I think most of like your personal ones, like around health, family, relationships, those I think I wouldn't say are a little bit more nebulous, but more so or easier to accomplish, but they just fall in a different realm than your work or your career. So some of those positive messages I think do help you accomplish those goals, and again goes back to staying motivated. And any other questions, I'm happy to answer that. Otherwise, we are at our hour together, and I appreciate you all jumping on today for our final Savvy series of the year, and hope that you can join us for conference next year and all of our other learning opportunities that we'll have throughout the year. So if you do have any other questions that come up, please feel free to email. And otherwise, I'll end our webinar for today and hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a happy holiday.